Okay, our next session this morning is the first of our partner showcases today. After that moves us on. So it's Cyber by Design, a program approach to the Cyber Ready University. It'll be presented by Saul Freeman from Sheffield Hallam University and Alistair Broom, who is the UK Director of Security at Logicalis. And because it's my institution and the program's at least partly my problem, I've been roped into some of it as well. So Saul and Alistair make their way up. And so just going to the start of where we were with the security program. In 2015, we'd been audited by our friends at KPMG, who'd found a number of what they floated as critical security issues with what we were doing. We'd also had a manual penetration test run by KPMG, which had surfaced a number of things that they claimed were critical. We'd managed to become really, really high priority and really visible to people like the Board of Governors, who were floating great concerns. They'd flagged it as their highest priority, and it was really key that we were starting to show some progress on this. We also, like many of you, were seeing demand for accreditation across the university for things like Cyber Essentials, for IG Toolkit, and things that they want that would help us get and maintain contracts. And so dropping out of this, we had a number of aims in IT. First one was we really felt we ought to improve security. Kind of obvious, but we thought we'd get it there. We were very keen to avoid box-ticking solutions. So where we put something in as a response to the audit, we wanted it to be a proper solution, not just something that would let us say, yeah, we've got one of them. And we wanted to make sure we had sustainable, lasting benefits for the university as well, both financially and for the amount of resource it would consume to operate some of these things. One of the problems we had when we came to this was the information that we got back from KPMG was very much very high level. You haven't got DLP. And the recommendation from KPMG was go and get DLP. But nothing in there that kind of said this is the risk that you're facing, these are the reasons why you want it, this is the business benefit that you need to try and achieve. And so a big part of what we've done over the past couple of years has been to try and find ways of getting this information back in to make sure that we're doing the right thing and getting the right benefit. And I'll hand over to Saul, who's going to talk about how we approach that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dave. Dave said it's partly his problem. I think it's also partly your fault. But I would say that, wouldn't I? So yeah, thanks very much, Dave. And apologies here because I'm going to be staring at a laptop screen as well because guess who didn't read the bit about notes. So yeah, as Dave has set out in 2015, partly as a result of the internal audit process, cyber has become a key priority at the Board of Governors and at senior university executive level. And it's become a key organisational level risk to be actively managed by the university. Obviously the university then took the mature approach and decided to point the finger at the IT department and expect us to solve cyber. So I'm sure you've possibly all been there. So our executives know they should be very worried by cyber, this scary thing called cyber, and we know that because the media tells them on almost a daily basis. So we have headlines like this. So universities need to plug into the threat of cyber attacks, or possibly unplug, maybe. Universities targeted by cyber thieves, and obviously the dates on these jig around between 2015 and 2017, but the tenor of them has largely been the same throughout that period. Half of firms having a cyber attack. I have a sort of bit of a background in business continuity, so my institute, the Business Continuity Institute, is forever sending scary stats about cyber to me, which obviously cheers me up on a daily basis. Newcastle, apologies if Newcastle are here, I probably shouldn't have put that one up. University suffering cyber attack, that, as you can see, dates back to 2015. And perhaps most scaringly, this. So who knew that Craig David was apparently the most dangerous celeb name to type into Google or in other search engines are available, obviously. Although, Dave, I think you questioned that when I showed you that. Yeah. You think it's...
Avril Lavigne.
Avril Lavigne.
Really? Far more dangerous than Craig David.
I'm going to pretend I know who Avril Lavigne is. So at least I know who Craig David is. So we've learned that the world is a scary place, but it's also really unpredictable. Who knew? Craig David. So I like that one. So I'm sure some of you have seen, I need to use the clicker, don't I? There we go. Have seen these things. So the dreaded internal audit actions tracker. and being careless, I've ended up with responsibility with Dave for the cyber portion of this. And as Dave's pointed out, our audit findings tend to have really useful phrases like the university does not, the university should, and the university must. I should probably whip through that really quickly and get it off the screen. Am I giving too much away on there? I don't know. I think I redacted a few bits, but not too much. So they're really useful, very high-level findings. And that's, of course, before we come to the other drivers like PCI, NHS, Information Governance Toolkit that Dave mentioned, and bids and contracts that business units have either completed or they need to sign in about a week's time. I don't know how many of you get those phone calls. We're about to sign this £5 million research or teaching contract, and it says here there's a box, have you got ISO 27001? We can tick that, can't we? It'll all be fine. So we tend to get some of those phone calls, and somehow they ended up towards me, and that's always fun. So effectively, how are we going to turn a generalised high-level worry and some very generalised high-level but deeply specific findings from our internal auditors into well-defined actionable results that will deliver benefits to the university and crucially lower risk, or certainly align risk to the university's risk appetite. So that's the challenge that we were facing. So who are you going to call? You've got these really high-level general concerns. We don't have a plan of action. Who are you going to call? It's obviously going to be a project and program manager, isn't it, Dave?
Absolutely.
Because you need us.
Think of anyone else.
Exactly. I'm a project manager, program manager, talking to an infrastructure audience, so I'm aware of the perilousness of my position here, so don't shoot me. So joking apart, clearly what we needed was a project, or certainly a collection of projects with defined outcomes and deliverables addressing specific risks. But what outcomes, what deliverables, what risks, and crucially what level of risk would be appropriate and acceptable to the organisation. So the trouble, and obviously I'm going to see it as a strength with being a program and a project manager, is of course that we are by our very nature generalists, which is a great thing until you need specific subject matter expertise. So prior to being involved with our cyber program, I was doing some work on infrastructure resilience with Dave and his infrastructure team, looking at RTOs, RPOs, architectural models, data centers, etc. Cybersecurity expert? Nope, I wasn't. So, as any good generalist knows, it pays to draw on the knowledge of a subject matter expert, unless you're the US president, in which case experts are the enemy and are to be avoided at all costs. So, Logicalis, as experts, have been long-term partners of Sheffield Hallam University. They've got a good understanding, have been tightly coupled with our infrastructure and our network teams, so it made sense to draw on their security expertise. So I don't know how many of you have seen this before. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with it. The CESG 10 Steps to Cybersecurity. We'd use this model as a way to begin to communicate, to break down, to unpick what the scary big thing called cyber was with our senior stakeholders across the university. It wasn't an implementation framework, it was an analytical model that we could use to make it seem a bit more coherent and understandable. So in the early thinking that Dave and I and our CIO, our acting CIO at the time, Leon Etherington, we had many discussions, as you can imagine, sort of between November 2015 and January 2016. And we decided that we would use this model, because we'd been socialising it out there across the university, would use this model to carry out a best practice review and a gap analysis of our security stance. So we'd use that as a broad set of analytical categories. So at this point, as I'm stumbling over my words, I'm going to hand over to Alistair Broom from Logicalis to describe the process of what we did next from the perspective of Logicalis. So essentially, that was the challenge. We'll use that framework, we'll analyse ourselves along with Logicalis, and we'll see what comes out at the other end. Alistair, over to you.
Thanks, Saul.
Good morning, everyone. So just so you know who I am, I work for Logicalis. I run the security business in the UK for Logicalis. So as Saul said, we've been working with the university for quite some time now on a number of projects, programs, most recently around security. And as Saul said, he's called in the experts, and I think security is one area where you do need to call in the experts. If you look at the threat landscape, it's incredibly dynamic, it's continually changing, and that's just now. I mean, if you look at some of the regulatory pressures coming, like GDPR, if you look at how the technology is changing with things like IoT, that's only going to get worse. So we've got a set of experts. We've spent a long time in security. And if you look at how that landscape is changing, to actually address that threat, if you look at who the real enemy is, it's cybercrime. We're not talking about our traditional competitors. We're not talking about traditional corporate or traditional education. We're talking about cybercrime. That's the adversary. So it's really important that we've got experts who understand what the security challenge is and how to address it. So I'm going to continue the visual metaphor theme. So our experts are based in Jersey, hence the plane. We keep them on an island so they can't escape. If you come across security experts, they tend to be, long hair, black shawls, flying drones around the car park at lunchtime, that kind of thing. So we keep them all on the island so they can't escape. So based on that model that Saul threw up there, we assembled a group of experts. So that 10 steps to cybersecurity ironically has 9 security domains in it. The first step is actually educating your organisation about the need for cybersecurity and communicating that program. But actually 9 domains within that 10 steps to cybersecurity. So we assemble a team of experts in each area. Security is very complex, it's very diverse. You do need experts in each area. It's too broad for one person to cover or one team to cover. So we assembled this team. We flew them over to Sheffield Hallam. We spent a lot of time talking to key stakeholders. And again, this is not just an IT issue. I think this came up somewhere before, but it's not just an IT issue. Security is really about information risk management. It's not something that IT can solve on their own. And in fact, if you don't get the whole organisation involved in the information security risk problem, then the project will fail. So we spent a lot of time talking to key stakeholders, understanding who the data owners were, understanding what the problems were, understanding who was responsible for security. And on the back of that, we could then build a program, or help Saul build a program to remediate against those issues. So after we'd interviewed all the stakeholders, the next step was really to do the gap analysis. So really looking at what the current state was. And Dave mentioned the KPMG audit that had taken place, so that really gave a baseline of where the university was. I think it's also worth pointing out that, and just picking up on Dave's point about technology, a traditional response to security is, oh, you need a particular technology, you need DLP. New threat comes along, new box, new technology, and there's a huge investment by not only education but across the industry in technology solutions to security. And if you go back far enough, when the threat was really, or the response to security was just a firewall and antivirus, that was an acceptable approach. But because the threat is so diverse now, because the potential solutions, technology solutions to those threats are so diverse, if you just take a technology approach to security, then you're going to end up with a lot of investment, huge technology sprawl, disparate vendors, disparate technology, very difficult to manage, a lack of a single pane of glass. And security is really moving into an area where it's all about visibility. It's not about defense anymore. You have to appreciate and expect that you're going to get breached at some point. So what's becoming more important is detecting the breach and responding to it. So there's a lot more about people and process now than technology. Technology is still very important, but it has to be governed by a people and process framework. Okay, so the gap analysis. So we sat down with the stakeholders. We got the information. The desired state was really based on 10 steps to cybersecurity, but this, as Saul said, is really an analytics type, the guidelines more than anything. These are areas that you need to consider in security. It doesn't really give you an implementation plan or really talk about what the security controls necessarily are. So we used 10 steps of cybersecurity as the baseline. That's how cybersecurity was presented to the key stakeholders in the university. But we also, when we're doing the gap analysis, we also paid homage to some of the other frameworks out there. And it's quite important to understand what the frameworks do, because they are many and varied. There's 3 of them up there. Some, like Cyber Essentials, are very controls based. So you need patching, for example. You need to configure your servers and your routers and your firewalls correctly. They need to be hardened. So very control based, quite technical. And they can be very useful. But if they're used in isolation, then you'll miss the people and process elements, which are even more important. And then at the other end of the spectrum, ISO 27001 is more about a governance framework. It's about the policies and the procedures. It's about the what, not the how. So by combining these frameworks in the gap analysis, focusing on the 9 areas that have been communicated to university, but paying reference to the people and the process elements in the other frameworks, we were able to come up with a plan, a gap analysis that was relevant to the framework, but also we could apply some quantitative measures to it. So we could start to prioritise. We could start to say that this risk is a higher priority than that risk. You know, and security has to be proportional to the risk. It's no good investing in a £1,000 safe to protect a $100 bill, a £100 note, whatever the analogy is. Yeah? So it has to be proportional. It has to be appropriate to the risk. And if you take a technology approach to security and miss out the risk analysis, you'll always waste investment. So we came up with an action plan. And what the result was, it was more than just a gap analysis, really. I think Saul backed me up on this. It gave the university the basis of a strategy to move forward, a long-term strategy to improve their security posture. We're still working through that now, and Saul will give you some more information on that. But the process we went through helped us take the raw data, which is basically the current state, how people were doing things at the moment, what technology was in use, where the data was, who were the data custodians, the raw data, turn that into information that could be analysed and acted upon by people who are perhaps non-technical or non-security. We then added the insight from the security experts within Logicalis, and that enabled us to come up with an action plan. And again, by taking that approach, you're looking at how you're going to get best value from your technology investments. You're looking at the people and process elements. You're not just looking at what the next threat is and investing in technology to address that threat. It's about proportional investment. So that was pretty much it for me. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Saul, who's going to take you through how we kind of implemented that plan and where we are with the project now. Thanks, Saul.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Alistair. So as Alistair hands over to me, I think I'm going to hand over to Dave shortly at this point. So really at the end of the piece, Dave's looking surprised there. I'm always doing that to him. So at the end of the piece with Logicalis, we were able to produce a heat map, really, of cybersecurity using, again, the 10 steps. And as we got up there, we've got February 15, when really we'd finished I suppose, initiated, starting worrying about cyber, through to November 15. So we were able, just in that sort of very early planning stage, to move a couple of the reds down to ambers. And you'll see that they're specifically around a security risk management regime control, and by beginning to spin up the early stages of the program, that showed that we were making intervention enough to reduce the risk down on that. And also about board level sponsorship of IT security policy. And again, the work that we'd done with the senior stakeholders across the university helped us to shift that one down. And we also did some quick remediation around some outstanding penetration tests. So that was a good one for me. That got me up and running fairly swiftly. And we worked really well, and it became a good model for working with our infrastructure, server, application teams to begin to surface the idea of cyber and what we needed to be doing. So we had some early progress, and we had a heat map, and we knew where we needed to be, and obviously there wasn't much green. And honestly, now it's interesting on reflection, although we're not at the lessons learned stage. I look at something like user education, awareness and control, and we have that as a low, but actually I think subsequent events showed that that was probably an optimistic finding, and it probably should have been significantly amber, or possibly even red. We'll come to that later. Excellent. So really, the outcome of that, and it sounds easier than it was, to be honest, at the time. So we'd done the review, we'd workshopped with our technical teams, business owners, across the organisation, stakeholders, and effectively worked to prioritise, as Alistair said. So out of all of those, and out of the possible options, possible interventions that you could make it against those 9 or 10 areas, what were they really going to look like? So we worked with Logicalis, and I think it's fair to say Logicalis put an awful lot in here in order to come up with statements of works and draft statements of work with outline commercials. Because as a project program manager, I needed that in order to build the business case to take to the university for the ask. What did we want to do? How much was it going to cost? How long was it going to take? And crucially, what were the benefits going to be, and where was it going to match to the university's risk appetite? So I think credit to our partner Logicalis for that, because I think, I don't think they were making any money out of us at that stage, really. We were doing a lot of work on honing those statements of work. But we did that work, and I think broadly it was successful. So we were able to build the business case, and that set out a 2-year program of around 14 projects, requesting an investment call of around 1.2 million. And in July 2016, the university senior executive approved the business case. They signed it off and said, off you go then, go and do it, which obviously was a challenge in itself. So we ended up with, so really between July and late September 2016, I spent my summer holiday doing this, which is great, trying to come up with a timeline for what this program was really going to look like. So you'll see that tranche 1, so we've got 2 tranches across academic years. Tranche 1 was really consisted of some quick wins, and a note to self: when your CIO says call the project quick wins, don't. Because they tend not to be. It's a hostage to fortune. That included 2 major pieces: firewall rationalization and ongoing management, and implementation of a security incident management process. We then had some feasibility studies. So really, as Alistair and Dave have alluded to, what we didn't want to do was just go out and buy a bunch of boxes. We're going to spend a load of money and everything will be better and everything will be great. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that we had proven to ourselves where the gaps were, where the fits were with our architecture and our service design, and to have, when we went for the big ask, to know that was the right thing to do. So consequently, feasibility studies, proofs of concepts, and pilots. So some of those included IDS, IPS, micro-segmentation. I think we'll come back to that a bit if we have time, because that's really interesting, and we're doing it as we speak. And two-factor authentication. We've got some sort of strange, weird and wonderful things up there, including prevent web options and prevent web implementation, prevent storage. Who wouldn't want to have things like prevent and GDPR dropping into their program? That's great. BYOD DLP implementation, we'll probably come back to that, because that's proved to be really, really interesting, that piece. In fact, we've renamed that. That's now data usage and risk analysis, and then implementation on the back of that. Malware was actually part of our feasibility study. And I think at this point, Dave, do you want to take on a little bit more detail about flexibility? Because I think we wanted to tie this discussion into being agile and flexible.
Okay, so one of the areas where we were able to bend the program approach to our advantage came when persons unknown, launched a spear phishing campaign against the Vice-Chancellor and pretty much all of the university's senior management team, which prompted a flurry of communications more or less along the lines of, what the hell are you doing and why can't you stop this? Which, in normal circumstances, we'd have come back and said, well, you can't stop this, we've got training, you've got these things, it's really down to the way that you behave about your email. Which wasn't really what they wanted. But what we were able to do with the program approach was to within the framework that we'd put in place was to, A, prioritise one of the pieces of work that was in there, I can't see it now, whatever. So the user training piece that was around dealing with phishing and things, that was sat in the programme but still some way down. We could move that up towards the top so that we could start delivering that fairly quickly and make that quite visible. But we were able to bring a new project into the programme as well around improving, reviewing and improving the iron ports that we use on the edge of the mail system to make sure they were better configured, to make sure that they were actually working the way that they should. But and that in itself is not fantastic, but what the programme did was give us a way to surface that back to the senior exec. So not only were we able to do some small changes which made things better for them, but we could go back through them and make it very, very visible to them that we were actually doing something that was having a real impact. And so it's not just the fact that we could make a small change, but it's the way that we were able to surface this. The programme reports back to some of the senior boards in the university, and so we could show quite effectively what was being done. And that was really successful. It's one of those incidents that gives you quite a significant risk in terms of reputation with the rest of the university if you can't respond to stuff like this. And the programme approach gave us that ability.
Absolutely, and sort of going back to the point about flexibility and agility, as I alluded to when we looked at our heat map and I pulled out user education, where, well, it was green, we thought it was all fine, and as Dave pointed out, he couldn't find that on our programme plan, our first iteration of it, and that's the very first iteration. It has, of course, changed. The reason Dave couldn't find it is because it wasn't on there. So again, as a result of the spear phishing, we actually had, I think, 3 attempts, didn't we? We had a short cluster of incidents, and effectively we realised that was a gap. We'd done our prioritisation. At the time it seemed valid, reasonable, and aligned to risk, all those good things. But of course events, dear boy, they took over. And so the user education awareness project that didn't even figure in the programme at that point, it was, okay, that's something we'll do as a CSI piece after the programme, got bumped in and prioritised. So that again shows the agility, and a program has to be a flexible. I'm sure I'm telling you things that of course you already know. A program has to be a vehicle that you can use to address changing organisational requirements, and with good governance you can do that. So that was a good example. And so with user education, in fact, we go live, I think on the 9th of October with cyber awareness training for all staff. So alongside your health and safety, fire awareness, training, etc. It's now compulsory for staff in our team in digital technology services, and also finance. Our finance department have adopted it as compulsory for their team. It's not compulsory yet for all university staff, but I think again that may change. But that's a good example of it didn't even make it into the first draft of the programme plan, and then we discovered we really needed it. The data usage and risk projects, and I'll have to watch time here because I could go on about this one for ages because it's the really interesting piece. Now effectively we're doing that now. Our cyber program, we've got an approved delay of 3 months because we moved a data centre which tied up our infrastructure, network and applications team. So that pushed my program back. Again, we have to flex to the broader piece. So actually we're doing the data usage and risk project at the moment, so it'll be the last one to close in tranche 1. Now at the beginning we thought it would be something about addressing that audit piece around DLP and BYOD, but actually it's gone much wider than that. So really it is analysing data usage by staff, and only staff in terms of scope, across the university, and trying to understand the risks, and then to see where those risks align with the university's appetite, and then to look at recommendations for controls. Now I think it's interesting, one, because it's a really large project, and secondly, we're doing it at the end of tranche 1, and that seems counterintuitive that we should have done that at the beginning. But I think, honestly, with the programme, and Dave and I and other stakeholders spent ages discussing this big, gnarly project, and it took us a long time to pin it down. And I think even if we had, we wouldn't have been best advised to run with that project earlier in the programme, because I think we needed to gain some credibility with the university to show that the programme really could deliver. And I think doing it now at the end of tranche 1, we've demonstrated capability and credibility. So effectively going out asking difficult questions that may result in changes to people and process and technology across the whole university. I think now we're in a good, mature position to do that. I don't think we would have been earlier. So again, that's about flexing and being agile to the environment. So I think just to sort of reiterate that, you don't have to get it right at the outset. A programme is going to be iterative, and we're going to shape it and improve it as we go. So, tranche 2, which we're rapidly heading up to. So this is where we're going to do the heavy lifting. This is where the large, complex and expensive technical implementation projects are going to run. So they will include IDS and IPS implementation. At the moment, we are at this very moment analysing our network to do some sizing, so we know, particularly looking at small packets, so that we make sure we size our IDS IPS solution correctly. We're right at the end of doing our NSX design piece, so we're heading off into microsegmentation, and that's been a really interesting journey. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit more about that, if we've got time, Dave.
Very quickly. So we've been working very closely with VMware to get an NSX design right, and that's gone from the 10 steps approach to say we really should have some microsegmentation because this is the way that the security sector, the network sector is obviously moving. But we don't know, A, how it works, B, what we need to do, what the problems are, what the business requirements of doing it are going to be. And so we've had some people from VMware on site for the past week and a half, I think, dragging a lot of quite busy network and security staff into workshops, making them sit there and recite IP addresses and open ports and firewall rules and all these things to start pulling this stuff together. We've been taking some of our bigger, scary systems apart to have a look at what the integration of the traffic flows to them are, to try and figure out what the firewall ports we need are going to be open when microsegmentation goes in. And we know that that's going to carry a certain amount of risk because of the way that things run for 2 days a month or 1 week a year and this kind of thing. So when we turn this thing on after only 3 or 4 months of monitoring, we're going to carry some risk that something breaks. And so we're working on a communications plan that will sit around this, why we're doing it, what we need to do, what you need to be aware of, and maybe you should do a test run of your service while we're monitoring this so that you can figure it out. Getting this bit right is going to be really, really key, and we've had some fantastic help from Logicalis and from VMware to get this together.
Absolutely. Which brings us on to comms. There are, of course, a number of ways to approach comms. We've taken a soft landing approach, really. We've told people what they needed to know as they've needed to know as it will affect them. And in tranche 1, because it's largely been some some optimistically quick wins around some technical pieces and then pilots and proofs of concept, we haven't done the wider comms to the entire stakeholder community, both staff and students across the university. And there's also, there was a decision early on, I guess there's 2 risks. If you say, hey, we're doing this fantastic cyber program, there's 2 risks to that. One, everyone will go, well, they're obviously crap, so they're obviously an open door, so we'll see if we can get in. And on the other side of that, if we say, hey, we're great, we're doing this 2-year cyber program, aren't we great? Well, let's find out how great you are. So it's, again, an invitation. So as we move into tranche 2, as the projects begin to affect a wider stakeholder group, we are having to ramp up our comms. And the cyber training that launches next month, that's a good leading edge way of doing that. So that raises visibility of cyber across the university. So really, as this one, I think we've covered it really. This was just to really describe that like the borders across Europe, project and program scope has changed over time, though with slightly less bloodshed, I think. It's happened across tranche 1, and it will happen across tranche 2 as well. So we know that. What else will happen? You know, another spear phishing attack or a related sort of risk or a different kind of risk. And obviously with Prevent, there's been, that was an unexpected addition to the program. GDPR now, so that really is a change where again the data usage and risk, and now we have a separate GDPR project within the program package as well. So that's been a change. So as I keep saying, I've got Prevent and GDPR, lucky me. Governance, and again, we've spoken a bit about this. We've got good governance in place. So we have a program board that meets monthly. We don't have individual project boards. We felt, again, in tranche 1, that would be too unwieldy and over-engineering. As we move into the larger projects in tranche 2, we will. And that program board, then we report up to a university strategy board, our building a great university board. So we've got good sight lines. So again, that's helped us build credibility. Internal audit, we've got quarterly reports on progress to the internal auditors. And we've also appointed, in a cunning move, we've appointed our internal auditors to carry out gateway reviews of the programme to ensure that we're on track to deliver the benefits that we promised the university. And that, in some point in the early summer, led to one of those, a significant assurance finding.
See it here. This is one of the big benefits of the programme approach, has been when KPMG came knocking again, so we're here to audit you, we said, don't look at all that security stuff over there because, as far as we're concerned, we're still doing that. But actually, we've got this huge strategic programme going on. Why don't you have a look at that instead? So it's a great way of distracting the auditors when they turn up to look at things.
He didn't say that.
No, we're not on camera. So as far as the university management is concerned, we've gone from a critical finding about security from KPMG to this about significant assurance, which over about 18 months has been a massive improvement. Helps us enormously with our credibility with the university, helps us get things done and get the resources back that we need to keep moving this forward.
So, at this point, this is the journey ahead, and obviously it should be a lovely road heading off with mountain views and lakes, but it's not, it's the M1 thing. Although, as Dave pointed out, there's not much traffic, so everything's going to be okay. So we're moving into tranche 2, planning and initiation as we speak, as we're wrapping up tranche 1. Resource management is becoming a key issue because effectively, well, we doubled our security team, but we're still drawing on infrastructure and network teams. So we're doing a lot of work focusing on resource management. And crucially, a plan for what comes next after the 2 years. What do we do next? Because we're not going to stop, clearly. And I think that's about all we've got time for. So don't know if we've got time for questions. If we have, Dave will take the difficult ones. Thank you very much.
There's no time for questions. Okay. Well, are there any questions? Very quickly. Go on, one here.
Anton Lawrence from University of Reading. We're also going through a bit of a cyber security program at the moment. How did you scope it? Did you scope it as being the whole university that required changing, or was it particular areas that you focused on first?
It had to be the whole university, so we were in a lucky position compared to other institutions that I've been at. We didn't have shadow IT. We'd centralised, well, way before my time at Sheffield Hallam. Dave, when had we centralised?
2011. I'd clarify that slightly. We didn't have much shadow IT.
I'm an optimist. So in terms of scope, being a central provider, and obviously that cut across research, professional services, faculties, student-facing, back office functions. So yeah, the scope was the whole, really. Well, I think obviously, you know, we're halfway through. We're coming up to halfway through. The part that will be hard, as I said, I think the data usage and risk project that started off being with this placeholder related to an audit finding around BYOD and DLP. You need DLP because of BYOD. That's probably going to be the most challenging. We're doing that work as we speak at the moment, going off interviewing role holders across the university, as well as engaging with senior stakeholders again to prep them for what might come at the back end of that, which could be significant changes to the way that people work. So I think, yeah, my answer would be probably that. That seems, you know, what will come out of that is probably going to be the biggest challenge.
Okay, one more question if there's anyone out there. No? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.